What if the woman everyone laughed at was the only one the billionaire truly loved? When Emma Carter walked into the Whitmore estate, they thought she was a maid, a mistake, a nobody, but they were wrong, and today they were about to lose everything. Let me take you back to the moment it all began. Emma Carter stepped into the grand hall of the Whitmore estate like a raindrop falling into a pool of oil. She didn't belong, and every polished eye in the room knew it. The marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, casting cold reflections onto the silk gowns and tailored suits that filled the room. Glasses of champagne tilted in manicured hands. Laughter, too sharp to be kind, bounced off the stone walls. Emma wore a simple gray linen dress, the hem brushing against worn flats that made no sound on the marble. A faded blue cardigan hung loosely over her shoulders, a soft threadbare shield against the chill in the air and the colder looks being thrown her way. The cloth bag on her shoulder sagged slightly from use, stitched by careful hands rather than expensive brands. No one greeted her. No one asked her name. Instead, a man in a gold tie, Brandon Whitmore, cocked his head with a smirk, his Rolex catching the light as he made sure everyone could hear. "Seriously," he said, loud and lazy, "who let the cleaning staff in?" The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was cruel, sharp, immediate. A woman in a crimson dress, Vanessa Whitmore, gave a laugh that was more a bark than anything resembling joy. "Maybe she's here to dust the will before it's read," she said, flicking her hair back in a practiced, dismissive move. Across the hall, Olivia Grant, young and hungry for attention, leaned into her friend Sophie Blake, her phone half hidden in one manicured hand. "Probably some sad charity case," Olivia whispered, her voice dripping with mockery, "or an old mistress looking for a payout." Emma said nothing. She stood near the back of the room, by a towering window that framed the misty hills beyond. The spring air outside looked fresher, kinder than anything in this room. Sophie lifted her phone, pretending to fix her hair while she snapped a photo. A few taps, a sly smile. "#Whitmore will crash," she typed with glee, sending Emma's image into the digital void where strangers would tear her apart just as gleefully. Emma saw it. She saw the camera, the whispering, the darting glances. She heard the muffled giggles from behind hands that pretended to stifle yawns. But she didn't react. She adjusted the strap of her cloth bag, her movements slow, deliberate, graceful, in a way that only made the room hate her more. More guests trickled in, investors, advisors, cousins twice removed, each one pausing to give Emma a once-over. None spoke to her. A few turned away outright, murmuring about poor taste and no class. Near the entrance, Richard Bennett, a former investor with deep pockets and deeper grudges, muttered to his wife, "Logan always did have strays hanging around. This one's got no business here." Margaret Cross, dripping in emeralds and disdain, clucked her tongue as her eyes raked over Emma's modest clothes. "She's embarrassing the family just standing there," she said, as if Emma couldn't hear every word. A cousin, Dylan Cross, in a velvet blazer 2 sizes too small for his ambition, called out, "Hey, sweetheart, the kitchen's that way," pointing with a crooked grin toward a side door meant for the staff. A ripple of laughter followed, mean and immediate. Emma's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the strap of her bag. Her breath stayed slow, steady, measured. She'd prepared for this. She had known exactly what would happen the moment she walked through those doors. But knowing didn't make it sting any less. The cruelest of them, Vanessa, sauntered across the room, heels clicking like a countdown. She stopped inches from Emma, her perfume thick and cloying, her smile a weapon. "You're in the wrong place, darling," she said, voice sugary and sharp. With 2 fingers, she flicked the sleeve of Emma's cardigan, as if shaking dust from an antique. "This isn't a soup kitchen. Why don't you leave before you embarrass yourself further?" The entire room watched. No one spoke. No one intervened. Their silence was a wall, impenetrable and complicit. Emma's hazel eyes lifted to meet Vanessa's without flinching. She said nothing, not a word. To them, that silence was weakness, confirmation that she didn't belong. They couldn't see the steel coiled beneath her calm. They couldn't see the quiet storm she carried inside, Trevor Lang. A distant cousin, desperate for attention, sidled past her and, unseen by most, slipped a cocktail napkin into the strap of her bag. On it, scrawled in bold marker, charity case. Olivia saw, Sophie saw, and their laughter started again, harsher now, almost giddy. Phones came up, flashes winked like tiny knives. Emma felt the slight tug at her shoulder, but didn't reach back, didn't check. She knew better. She knew the crowd wanted a reaction, to see her flinch, to see her break. She gave them nothing, only a slow, steady breath as she turned her gaze toward the large oak chair at the front of the room. The seat reserved for Edward Sullivan, the family's lawyer. The clock above the fireplace ticked loudly in the thickening air. In 5 minutes, the will would be read, and everything would change. But for now, Emma stood alone. A quiet figure surrounded by wolves. A woman underestimated, locked, and dismissed, exactly as they were meant to. The crowd grew denser as the clock ticked toward 10. More relatives arrived, cousins from old money, investment bankers from Manhattan, distant aunts wrapped in pearls and entitlement. The grand hall, with its oak panels and heavy velvet drapes, felt smaller, now thicker, the air humming with impatience and hunger. Emma remained still. A gray figure in the sea of ambition. Across the room, Olivia Grant's voice rose, cutting through the murmur like a scalpel. She tilted her phone toward her friend Sophie Blake, the photo of Emma enlarged for full effect. "You have to see the comments," Olivia said, giggling. "Lost her invitation at Goodwill? Hope she gets a doggy bag from the reading? It's going viral already." Sophie laughed, pressing her hand to her mouth in mock shock. "You think she even knows she's a meme yet?" she whispered. Emma heard them. Of course she did, but she didn't move, didn't react. Brandon Whitmore leaned against the grand piano, swirling the champagne in his glass, his gaze lazily cutting through the crowd until it settled once again on Emma. "You know," he said loud enough to turn heads, "Logan always did have a soft spot for strays. Maybe this one's hoping for a handout. Or maybe—" He let the suggestion hang, vulgar and deliberate. Richard Bennett chuckled, low and conspiratorial, as if sharing an inside joke only the powerful would understand. "A little charity never hurt," he said, "until it thinks it belongs." The laughter spread again, low and poisonous, like a slow leak of gas into a room sealed tight. Every snicker, every sideways glance, another small cut aimed at carving Emma down to nothing. By the windows, Margaret Cross whispered to her sister-in-law, not bothering to lower her voice. "She looks like she walked here. Honestly, this is disgraceful. Logan would be rolling in his grave." A flash. Another photo snapped. Somewhere, someone's phone pinged. Another cruel caption, another ripple of laughter. Emma tightened her grip on her cloth bag. The napkin Trevor had slipped into the strap was still there, fluttering slightly as she breathed. Charity case. Bold, black letters declaring to the room exactly what they thought she was. She could have torn it off, could have turned, said something sharp enough to wound them back. But she didn't. She understood the test better than they did. She understood that the room was being watched, by more than just eyes. Near the refreshments, Dylan Cross sauntered past a group of whispering cousins, his voice pitched just loud enough. "I give it 5 minutes before they escort her out. Bets?" "3, Olivia said, grinning. 2, Sophie countered, laughing. Emma shifted her weight slightly, her flats making no sound. She kept her gaze on the high-backed chair at the front of the room, where Edward Sullivan would sit, where everything would turn. The tension stretched, a taut wire strung between her and the crowd, humming louder with every cruel word, every mocking glance. Vanessa Whitmore made her way across the room again, this time trailing a group of similarly dressed predators. She stopped near Emma, her hand on her hip, her crimson dress a bright, jarring wound in the otherwise muted room. "You poor thing," Vanessa said, her voice dripping pity like acid. "You must be so embarrassed, standing there in those shoes." A titter of laughter answered her. Vanessa leaned closer, her perfume a suffocating wall between them. "Maybe no one told you," she whispered, "but charity cases don't get invited to read wills. They get invited to clean up afterward." Emma blinked once, slowly, a single, deliberate breath. Vanessa stepped back, triumphant, flashing a smile at the growing crowd of spectators who were gathering as if waiting for blood. Margaret clucked her tongue again. This is what happens when you open the gates to outsiders. Sophie snapped another photo. Another cruel caption sent off into the void. The likes pouring in, a digital bonfire of mockery. Emma stayed rooted, her posture calm, her silence so low it became a presence all its own. An accusation sharper than any words. The tension buzzed louder now, electric, unbearable. As if the very walls leaned in to listen for the crack, any crack, in her composure. From the far end of the hall, Edward Sullivan appeared at last, his gray suit impeccable, his briefcase heavy with the weight of legacy. He made his way toward the front, the room shifting subtly to acknowledge him. The chatter died down into a hush, but not a respectful one. It was the expectant quiet of wolves circling their prey. Emma's eyes didn't follow him. She was already watching the empty chair, already prepared for what was to come. But the others, they were not. They were too busy sneering at her, laughing at her, dismissing her. Too busy showing the world exactly who they really were. And the world was watching. The scrape of Edward Sullivan's chair echoed through the grand hall as he sat at the front table, unfolding a stack of heavy documents with meticulous care. The sound was sharp, final. It sliced through the murmurs, dragging the last shreds of mockery into a waiting silence. The crowd leaned in, the energy in the room tightening into something brittle and electric. Emma stood motionless near the window. Still ignored, still dismissed, at least by those who hadn't yet grown bold enough to escalate their cruelty further. Brandon Whitmore straightened his gold tie and strode forward a few steps, a smirk playing at the edges of his mouth. He pointed directly at Emma without even pretending discretion. "I'd like to formally protest this person's presence," he said, his voice heavy with forced politeness. "This reading is for family and rightful stakeholders, not for uninvited charity cases." A few heads nodded. Richard Bennett gave a theatrical sigh of agreement. Margaret Cross clutched the heavy pearls at her throat, gasping softly as if Emma's mere existence was an insult to decency. "She's an embarrassment," Margaret said, her voice loud and certain. "Someone escort her out. Spare Logan's memory this disgrace." Olivia Grant's fingers flew over her phone, posting a new caption. "Live drama at the Whitmore Will reading, imposter alert." Across the floor, Dylan Cross, emboldened by the swelling tide of disdain, laughed and tossed a wadded napkin toward Emma's feet. It missed her by inches, but the message was clear. Trash belongs in the trash. Still, Emma didn't move. Didn't even glance down. Her composure was a wall they couldn't scale, and it infuriated them. Vanessa Whitmore approached next, her crimson dress slicing through the space between them like a knife. She circled Emma slowly, as if inspecting a stain on an otherwise pristine floor. "You know," she said, voice dripping venom, "if you cared at all about Logan, you would have stayed away. Instead, you come here, like some desperate, pathetic, little leech." Emma blinked slowly, her face unreadable. The cloth bag still rested against her side, the napkin-branded charity case fluttering lightly in the shifting air. The cruelty in the room was no longer hidden. It had become entertainment. A sport. Gerald Hayes, tall and red-faced, stood and jabbed a thick finger toward Emma. "This woman's a fraud," he bellowed. "I knew Logan better than most. He would never associate with the likes of her." His wife nodded furiously beside him, emeralds flashing in the light. "Check her bag," she demanded. "She's probably got fake documents, fake ID. She's a gold digger, a scam artist." Edward Sullivan, still arranging his papers with slow, deliberate precision, lifted his gaze once, briefly, to Emma. His expression unreadable. Then he looked away and continued, unmoved. The mob, sensing an opening, surged louder. A chorus of outrage, manufactured and self-righteous. Trevor Lang, smirking, raised his glass of champagne in a mocking toast toward Emma. "Here's to the freeloaders," he said, laughing, before knocking back the drink in a single swallow. Someone else muttered, "Call security." Another whispered, "She should be ashamed." Emma didn't flinch, not once. The clock struck 10. The deep chime rolled through the hall like a drumbeat. Edward Sullivan stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. He picked up a single sealed envelope, its wax seal intact and glinting under the chandelier light. The room fell silent. Not out of respect, but out of raw, animal hunger. At that moment, Margaret Cross turned sharply toward Emma, her voice sharp and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Leave now," Margaret said, her tone icy, "before you make an even bigger fool of yourself." Emma's eyes remained fixed on the front of the room, her expression serene, her breathing slow and steady. Edward cleared his throat, commanding attention without raising his voice. "We are gathered here," he said, "to read the last will and testament of Daniel Whitmore." The name, spoken aloud, seemed to weigh down the room. The relatives pressed closer, their earlier derision momentarily eclipsed by greed. Phones disappeared into pockets. Laughter dried into thin, tight smiles. Olivia shoved her phone away, eyes gleaming. Brandon adjusted his jacket, suddenly sober. Vanessa's fingers curled against her side, her nails digging into her palm. Sophie Blake tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her earlier smugness dissolving into something more brittle. They all braced themselves for the rewards they thought they deserved. For the titles, the homes, the stakes in Daniel's billion-dollar empire. Emma remained still at the back, unseen yet unavoidable, the lone stone in their perfect shoe. Edward Sullivan broke the seal with a soft, decisive crack. He unfolded the will with care, the heavy paper whispering under his fingers. The room held its breath. In just a few moments, everything they thought they knew would unravel. But not the way they expected. Not at all. Edward Sullivan's voice was steady, almost clinical, as he began to read. "I, Daniel Alexander Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my final will and testament." The crowd leaned forward, eager, hungry. Brandon Whitmore smirked, already picturing the keys to the Whitmore estates in his hands. Vanessa's red nails drummed against her champagne glass, counting imaginary zeros. Olivia's fingers hovered over her phone, ready to blast her victory to the world. Edward continued, "To my family, colleagues, and associates gathered here today, I leave nothing but this truth. Wealth reveals character, not worth." A silence dropped so heavy, it seemed to bend the very air. Frowns appeared. Confused whispers buzzed. Brandon laughed once, sharp and nervous. A joke. He's setting us up for the big reveal. But Edward's voice remained calm. "All my assets, company shares, properties, accounts, intellectual rights, are bequeathed to one person, the one who stood by me for no reason other than love, the one who never asked for my net worth, the one who never sought my name for status." He paused, letting the words sink deep into the suddenly ashen faces. "My wife," Edward finished. "Emma Carter." The room erupted. "What? Impossible. She's lying." "No way." Brandon's glass hit the floor and shattered. "Forgotten." Vanessa's face paled to the color of her pearls. Olivia stared at Edward, her mouth open, words scrambling but refusing to form. Margaret Cross's voice cut through the chaos. "This is fraud. Daniel was never married." Gerald Hayes stood, his chair scraping harshly across the marble. "This is a scam. We demand proof." Edward Sullivan remained unfazed. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Documents, thick and deliberate. "A certified marriage license," he said, holding it up. "Dated 7 years ago. Witnessed and signed legally by Laura Mitchell and James Cooper." A murmur spread, disbelief shaking the room like a storm brewing just beyond the windows. "And," Edward added, flipping the folder open further, "personal letters, joint account records, private photographs." He slid a photo onto the table. Daniel and Emma, laughing outside a small courthouse, simple and real, their arms wrapped around each other without a care for the world. Brandon stumbled forward, face twisted in rage. This can be faked. Anyone can print documents." Vanessa's voice rose to a shriek. "Where is she then? Where's the supposed wife? Hiding? Ashamed?" Emma moved. Quietly, purposefully, she stepped forward from the shadows of the hall, walking with the slow certainty of a gathering storm. Every step was a blow to the room's crumbling illusions. The linen of her dress caught the light. The cardigan slid further down her shoulder. But she didn't stop to adjust it. Her chin was lifted, her hazel eyes steady. The crowd parted instinctively as she approached, like sheep sensing the presence of a wolf, but realizing too late who the real predator had been. She stood beside Edward Sullivan. She didn't need fanfare. Her presence said everything. Gasps rippled through the hall. Brandon's jaw dropped open. Vanessa took a stumbling step back, nearly knocking over her champagne flute. Olivia's hands trembled, her phone forgotten in her lap. Emma Carter, the woman they had mocked, humiliated and dismissed, was Daniel Whitmore's wife, the sole heir to everything they had come to claim. Emma turned to face them at last. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear, like a blade sliding through silk. "I didn't come here for the money," she said. "I came to see who you really were." The room was frozen, their perfect masks slipping, their true faces laid bare. Emma's gaze swept over them, each sneer, each cruel laugh, each whispered insult still fresh in her memory. "You showed me exactly who you are," she said. Brandon tried to recover, his smirk flickering back. "You expect us to believe this? You? Logan, Daniel, would never marry someone like you." Emma tilted her head slightly. Her cardigan slipped further, exposing the smooth line of her collarbone. She didn't care. "I shop at thrift stores," she said simply. "Daniel loved that about me. He loved that I never wanted anything from him, except him." The words landed like hammer blows in the brittle silence. Olivia found her voice again, sneering. "Nice story, but one photo doesn't prove anything. Anyone can fake memories." Emma didn't respond. Edward did. He reached into his case once more and produced a small USB drive. He plugged it into the laptop at the front of the hall. The screen behind him flickered to life. Grainy footage played. A courthouse 7 years ago. Daniel Whitmore laughing, pulling Emma close, pressing a kiss to her forehead, as two witnesses, Laura and James, clapped behind them. The date stamped clearly in the corner. The proof was irrefutable. Margaret Cross gasped and clutched her pearls so hard they snapped, beads spilling across the marble like scattered gilt. Trevor Lang took a staggering step back, bumping into a side table. Vanessa turned away, furious, humiliated. Brandon simply stared, his gold tie suddenly a noose around his thick neck. And then, the lights dimmed slightly. A new screen activated. A new feed. Live. A man sat calmly in a dim room, his hair streaked with gray now, but unmistakably Daniel Whitmore. Alive, watching. The date and time blinked clearly at the bottom corner of the screen. April 15, 2025, 10:32 a.m. The crowd gasped, as if the oxygen had been ripped from the room. Daniel leaned forward, his blue eyes sharp, his voice low and steady through the speakers. "You thought I was dead," he said. "You thought you could divide my life like a vulture tearing at a corpse." Silence reigned. No laughter now, no sneering, only the sharp, gutting realization that they had been watched the entire time. "You showed your true selves," Daniel continued. "Emma warned me. She knew you would, and she was right." He smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "Today wasn't just about a will. It was about revealing who deserved to stand beside me and who didn't." Emma stood there, unmoving, the storm in her blood finally finding the open sky. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She hadn't needed revenge. The truth had spoken for her, and it was louder than anything. For a long moment, no one moved. The live feed of Daniel Whitmore remained on the screen behind Edward Sullivan, his gaze steady, his presence undeniable. Emma stood beside the lawyer, the folds of her simple linen dress barely shifting, as if even the air around her had learned to respect her space. Daniel's voice, calm and cutting, filled the hall once again. "You judged her, without knowing her. You mocked her because you saw weakness where there was strength. You assumed money made you worthy. It does not." He paused, letting the silence crush them further. "And because of that," Daniel said, "there will be consequences." At a nod from Daniel, Edward Sullivan pulled a second document from his briefcase, a thick packet stamped with a crimson seal. "An addendum to the will. In accordance with Mr. Whitmore's final wishes," Edward began, "any individual who insulted, mocked, humiliated, or otherwise showed contempt for Mrs. Emma Carter during today's proceedings, either verbally, physically, or digitally, is hereby disinherited." Gasps tore through the room like a sudden storm. Chairs scraped against marble. Champagne glasses trembled in hands suddenly gone pale. Brandon Whitmore lunged forward. "You can't do that," he barked. "We're blood. We're family." Edward's face remained neutral. "Blood without loyalty means nothing," he said quietly. Guards in dark suits stepped into the room. their movements smooth but firm. Edward began reading names. Brandon Whitmore, Vanessa Whitmore, Olivia Grant, Sophie Blake, Gerald Hayes, Margaret Cross, Trevor Lang. Each name fell like a gavel strike, heavy and final. One by one, the guilty were approached by security, not dragged, not shouted at, just gently removed. A far greater humiliation than any scene they could have made. Brandon tried to push back, but the guard's hand on his shoulder was immovable. "You're throwing away the family name for her?" He spat toward Emma. "Some nobody?" Emma didn't flinch. Vanessa's voice cracked as she tried to argue, her nails digging into her own palms. "You're making a mistake, Daniel. We were always there for you." Daniel's voice from the screen was colder now. "No, you were there for what you thought you could take from me." Olivia dropped her phone, the screen shattering on the marble. Her empire of followers, sponsors, and validation crumbling in real time as her online accounts were systematically wiped clean, thanks to Daniel's reach and preparation. Olivia stumbled after the guards, whispering frantically, "This isn't happening. This isn't happening." Trevor laughed once, sharp and humorless. "This is insane," he said. "You set us up." Emma finally spoke, her voice low but unmistakable. "No," she said, "you set yourselves up." Margaret clutched at her broken pearl necklace, her pride spilling across the floor with it as she was quietly led away. Within minutes, the grand hall had emptied. The echo of their departure left a hush that was almost sacred. Only a few remained. Laura Mitchell, the nurse who had quietly nodded to Emma when she entered. James Cooper, the librarian who had never looked at Emma with anything but quiet respect. Anna Lewis, the old groundskeeper, who had offered Emma a glass of water without asking a single question. People who had seen her, not her clothes, not her bag, not her perceived status, but her. Daniel's voice softened. "You stayed true," he said to the few left, "and you will be honored for it." Edward Sullivan handed each of them small envelopes. Inside were private letters of thanks from Daniel, along with meaningful gifts, trusts, scholarships, shares not born from greed but gratitude. The empire would be rebuilt on people who understood loyalty and kindness. Daniel's face flickered off the screen at last, his work finished. The cameras around the room dimmed into silence. Emma stood alone now at the front of the hall, her hands lightly folded in front of her. The simple bag still hung from her shoulder, the forgotten charity case napkin long since fallen to the floor, trodden underfoot by the pride it once represented. She turned to the few who remained, her hazel eyes worn now, no longer guarded. "Thank you," she said simply. No fanfare, no drama, just gratitude, the kind that needed no witnesses to be real. Laura Mitchell stepped forward first, her eyes damp. "I'm sorry for what they did," she said, her voice trembling. Emma shook her head gently. "You have nothing to apologize for," she said. "You saw me when it mattered." James Cooper smiled a little and adjusted his glasses. "Daniel chose well," he said. Anna Lewis gave a simple nod, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word. Emma smiled back, soft and real. The kind of smile that could heal a room torn by greed. Slowly she crossed the hall, past the broken pearls, past the shattered glass, past the empty chairs, toward the wide-open doors and the misty green hills beyond. Her steps light, her heart steady. Emma hadn't just inherited an empire, she had inherited the truth. And she carried it with the quiet dignity of someone who had already won, long before anyone else knew the game had even begun. Sometimes, the loudest strength is silence. Sometimes, the greatest wealth is dignity. And sometimes, the real victory is simply standing tall when the world tries to bow you low. If you believe that true worth isn't measured by appearances or wealth, comment 1 below. If you believe loyalty and kindness should always come before status, comment 2 below. And if this story touched something deep inside you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength can move mountains. Subscribe for more stories that reveal truth, restore dignity, and remind us what really matters.